what is research method?
So research methods really kind of gets at the idea of how we collect and analyze information in a structured manner.
And for you to conduct research, there should be something you're interrogating, right?
Yes.
So how do you frame research questions?
Research question that is going to, in a large part, determine the method that you use.
Okay.
And so how you frame it becomes very important.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Auburn MPA Goes Beyond the Books podcast. And today we are discussing research methods and fieldwork. And our guest today on the podcast is Dr. John Morris. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much. Could you please introduce yourself?
Sure. So, my name is John Morris. I'm a professor here in the Department of Political Science. I've been at Auburn now as a faculty member since fall of 2019, so the beginning of my 7th year. But I've been in academia quite a while. For the 17 years, I think, before I came here, I was a faculty member and professor at Old Dominion University in Virginia. And the 8 years before that, I was a faculty member at Mississippi State University in Starkville, Mississippi. And prior to that, for an Auburn connection, I got my Ph.D. here from Auburn, graduating in 1994.
Oh, okay. Welcome, Prof.
Thank you.
All right, so, and our next guest is Bennett Nyadzi.
Yeah, you're
right?
right.
So, please can you introduce yourself? I mean, Bennett is, you are a Ph.D. student.
I'm a Ph.D. candidate.
Candidate,
Yeah,
sorry
PhD.
about that. Yeah.
As of yesterday.
Yeah.
Congratulations,
Of course,
Bennett.
Yeah. Yeah, so thanks for having me too. I'm a PhD candidate here in the Department of Political Science.
Mm-hmm.
And prior to Auburn, I was a teaching assistant at the University of Ghana, where I obtained my Master of Philosophy in Public Administration.
Mm-hmm.
Here in Auburn, my research area is basically public administration, particularly environmental governance.
Okay.
I'm currently working on a dissertation, my dissertation, where I'm looking at the role of third sector in terms of climate resilient water infrastructure.
Mm.
Yeah, so briefly, that is Bennett.
Third sector, you mean the non-profit
Third sector, yeah, the non-profits, community-based organizations, indigenous groups.
all right.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much. Yeah, so before we set the ball rolling for the conversation, I mean, Dr. Morris, you're the first faculty member to grace this podcast, and we're happy to have you. We are so excited to share from your wealth of knowledge. Welcome, and thank you for agreeing to be here.
That's quite an honor to be the inaugural guest, so thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, but then I lifted a paragraph from your biography, and I'll just read, and it says that your research interests include infrastructure policy, water quality policy, water governance, federalism. You're also an internationally recognized expert on Water Quality Act. So to date, you have published, and this is the most interesting part of it, to date you have published 14 books, over 130 scholarly articles and book chapters, and delivered more than 100 conference papers. My question is, how did you do that?
Not a lot of sleep. No, I think it's a combination of things. One is I really enjoy the research enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
I find it stimulating, interesting, and for anyone who looks at my CV, the topics that you've talked about certainly are all on there, but there are even others. And as I come across interesting projects or I get invited to interesting projects, it's very hard for me to say no.
Mm-hmm.
And so the net effect of that is that there's always a lot of projects, and some number of those are going to end up being published.
Okay.
For all the ones that are published, there's probably at least one and probably a couple of others that don't get published.
Mm-hmm.
But we have an old saying that if you love what you do, it's not work. And I really enjoy this. And another part I need to say as well, because I think it's so critical, is that Well, I do have a pretty good number, I think, of single-authored publications, both books and articles. I really enjoy working with other people,
Okay.
and so it's a lot easier to be really productive when you have really great colleagues that you work with.
Yeah.
And I've been really lucky throughout my career to be able to work with people that I really admire and that I enjoy working with. And then the other piece of that as well, in terms of sort of working with other people, is making opportunities for students.
Okay.
And that's always been a big part of kind of my ethos. My faculty did that for me when I was a student, and I've tried throughout my career to make those opportunities available to my students as I'm able to. And so there's lots of benefits to that, right? It's not just me that gets the publications, but students also get the publications, which helps them in their careers as well. So add that together, and the numbers pile up after 31 years.
I know. And one striking thing about what you just said is that in our previous episode, we dealt with a topic on journal publication and conferences. And our guest on that podcast episode talked about faculty members making opportunity for students, to be able to attend conferences, to be able to present papers at conferences, so that they can also build, their portfolios and, scholarly articles that, they publish, both in the journal, for journal publication and conference publication. So, that's a very, very important point you made.
Yeah, it's huge, and I think particularly at the Ph.D. level of education, it's critical that a Ph.D. program make those opportunities. If faculty in the program are not making those opportunities for their students, they're doing something wrong.
Yeah.
And I'll also say, here at Auburn, for example, we have the Ph.D. program. We also have the Master of Public Administration program, and there are opportunities for master students as well. Okay. To be engaged. In fact, just within the last couple of days, we've had conversations about a new project, and we've identified an MPA student who will be joining us as a co-author on this project.
Interesting.
So I think it's more about the willingness and the desire to be engaged, and the willingness and desire to learn what the research enterprise looks like, and for people who are willing and interested in that, there's always opportunities. And I think Auburn particularly does a really good job of making those opportunities available.
I agree. I'm the first person to agree. So Bennett, are there researches that you're working on apart from your dissertation?
Well, yes. Prior to my dissertation, I did a couple of works with even Professor Morris himself.
Okay.
We published
so you've benefited from
of
the
course,
opportunity.
I've benefited from
he got dragged in.
Yeah, just to recast back. When I came in my first year, I had to work with him as a research assistant.
Okay.
And he was so flexible with me.
Okay.
And then he got to know my research area. And then he told me, there's something that I'm working on. If you are willing to, you can join. I just joined and then did a bit of literature review, and I'm glad to be part of the the authors. So yes, as he said, the department gives that. The professors are so flexible.
Yeah.
They allow you, especially if you are willing to, they allow you to come into their space and get involved in their
work that they're doing.
Yeah, but coming back to your question. Yes, apart from my dissertation, I am mostly around the public administration field. And so apart from my dissertation, there are things I'm currently doing on how public sector responds to disasters such as COVID-19.
Okay.
And especially I'm looking at it from the perspective of my home country. Oh. So there's a friend that I'm working on it with. Apart from that, too, there's a work I'm working on in terms of e-government. Okay. How electronic government influences public trust, which I'm working on with Professor Morris.
Oh.
Yeah, so apart from my dissertation, I've got some other things.
Interesting. Okay, so, we have laid kind of a foundation for, to have this conversation. But then to delve into the conversation, I would like to ask, what is research method? And this question is for the purposes of our viewers, people who are new to the research field, and just for them to actually understand what exactly is research method.
Yeah, so research methods really kind of gets at the idea of how we collect and analyze information in a structured manner. We are taking in information all the time, right? Anybody watching this, for example, is taking in information, and hopefully helpful information.
Yeah.
But even if we're just walking along the street, right? We still take in information. We hear things, we see things, and our minds are constantly sort of processing this information that we see. And certainly, if you think about something like reading a book or watching the news or something, it's the same process. And so your mind is taking in this information. When we do this in our normal lives, it's largely haphazard, right? We don't plan it. We just come across the things we do, and we take this in and do this. And certainly, as human beings, we all then draw conclusions from the things that we see and hear and read and so forth. But if we're going to conduct scientific research, then we need to be a little bit more careful, if you will, and purposive about how we collect the information and then how we treat that information in order to learn something about the world. And this is where research methods comes in. You can think of research methods as basically being a set of tools that you put together in a specific kind of way based on a specific kind of information that you think you want, and then a specific plan for how you're going to actually treat that information once you get it. Okay. So research methods is a lot about not just the planning of how you do this, but then also the process.
The process, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So are there, how do you decide on the method that you use, to conduct a research? For me, in my Poly 7000, I did research method. And we talked about qualitative, quantitative, mixed method, right? So how do you get to decide, the kind of method to use?
Yeah, excuse me. I think there's a couple of things that come into play. Depending on who you talk to, you'll get different answers, I think, about which is the most important. But I think there are generally a couple of things. For me, I think the most important thing that I get to is, what do I think is the best way to answer the question that I'm trying to ask?
Yeah.
Okay. Because you named the three kind of major approaches to this, right? And they're big categories. There's a lot in each of those categories, but they do a good job of kind of giving you a typology to work from. So qualitative information is about basically words and impressions and observations, human observations. Quantitative is more about using numbers and reducing information to numbers, and then using typically some sort of statistical process on those numbers to arrive at some sort of understanding. And then a mixed method would be some combination of those two things.
Okay.
And in my mind, the most important thing is, what's the thing you're trying to find out about? Right. What's the question that you're asking, and how can you best get an answer to that question? Some questions lend themselves well, for example, to quantitative methods, while other questions really don't lend themselves very well. But it's actually more complicated even than just that, right? There's more to consider. For example, oftentimes when you find a new area of research where not much work has been done, it's also the case typically that there's really not a lot of information out there. And even if there is, you're not sure exactly what that information is or how relevant it is. And so oftentimes, if we're doing what we refer to as exploratory research, right, kind of a first look, that's something that we may do more in kind of a qualitative mode, right, where we have discussions with people and interviews, for example, to try to even sort of describe what the landscape looks like, that would allow us later on then to be more purposive about how we go about it. But sometimes there are other processes where quantitative data will just lose something. I did a study now probably 12 or 14 years ago where we went and looked to see what some environmental collaborations were doing and how they did their work. And we had 3 case studies all located within about a 25 or 30 mile radius of one another. And first of all, there wasn't quantitative data out there that we could get.
Yeah.
We could have perhaps tried to survey through a web survey or a mail survey. We could have tried to survey members of these organizations. But in a survey, typically your answers are almost predetermined, right? There are different kinds of survey questions, but by and large, you ask a question, then you give some choices, and you sort of force people to choose one of those things.
Yeah.
Right. In order for that even to make sense, though, you have to know what the possible options are that you can give people.
Mm-hmm.
So we did this all through interviews. It was entirely qualitative. And so we went out and talked to people and asked through what we refer to as a semi-structured interview, where we have a general idea of what the questions are, but then questions also emerge as part of the conversation. Much more effective way to really understand what the processes were that these different organizations use to accomplish their goals. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes it's not just being being exploratory. Sometimes it's really that the best way to get to the question is through some method other than a survey or some other set of numbers.
Okay. So, Bennett, you talked about having, taking part in researches, you're conducting research. And for you to conduct research, there should be something you're interrogating, right?
Yes.
So how do you frame research questions, to be able to, interrogate a particular issue that you have, that you've noticed, Yeah.
Yeah, so, that's a good question. Yeah, over the years, what I've learned is that, the research question, as Dr. Morris spoke about, it actually really drives large part of the research that you are conducting.
Mm-hmm.
It is a research question that is going to, in a large part, determine the method that you use.
Okay.
And so how you frame it becomes very important.
Yeah.
And as social scientists, you don't want to frame the research question in a way that's sort of like you're assuming that you know something, right? I remember when I was trying to frame some of my research questions for my dissertation, there were some of the questions that I framed as if I know that this question exists already, right? And then my dissertation committee had to, bring me back online that, we can't really assume that this exists. As social scientists, we have to be neutral as much as possible. You don't want to be so subjective.
Yeah.
And so you want to frame your research in such a way that you don't assume that you know. You ask it as a broad question, hoping that if you go on the field, if you are trying to answer the question, you can get different answers. You don't try to frame it in a way that, well, maybe the answer I'm expecting is yes.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, but you want to frame it in such a way that the answer you expect is, if you receive a no, yeah, it's an answer. If you receive a yes, it's an answer.
Yeah.
So
even you don't know,
or even you don't know, of course, yeah. So you want to be neutral as much as possible in framing your research question. So, for instance, my as I told you, my dissertation is about how social vulnerability impacts water-related outcomes. And so one question was, when I was trying to frame the question, one of the questions was that how does social vulnerability impact water-related outcomes? Now, to better frame it, I could frame it as to what extent, right?
Okay.
To what extent does social vulnerability impact water-related outcomes?
Yeah.
So for that, to what extent, I'm not sort of determining that I know already that there is an impact or there is an influence, but to what extent I'm open to receiving anything, right? Yeah, so in framing research questions, from my perspective, I think you should be as neutral as much as possible and then open to finding different responses to the questions. I don't know if Dr. Morris has anything.
No, I think that's a great example. Yeah, and years ago as a undergraduate student, I took a course in the philosophy department here, and the course was entitled Introduction to Logic. And I still remember, and of course this is more years ago than I'm probably willing to admit that this happened, so a different cultural time for this. Yeah. But I remember that one of the examples about the issue that Bennett's coming up here, that's a logical fallacy, in fact. And the instructor put it this way: imagine a question that says, when did you stop beating your wife?
Okay.
Right. Now, domestic violence is it's a bad thing.
Issue,
This
yeah.
is the example that he used. But if you think about what the question is, right, and the way the question is framed, it assumes that you were doing that in the first place. Because you can't answer the when you stopped unless you were doing it to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you think about this same sort of structure in a research question, if you assume something to be the case and then ask a question about it, you never are examining whether or not it's actually the case to begin with.
True.
Right. And so what we really try to do, and I think good researchers will always do, is not make assumptions about these things.
Okay.
And try to frame our research questions in such a way that we're approaching it as Bennett said, and I think the phrase is right on. It's kind of a neutral observer, right, where we don't make those assumptions. We go out and empirically look at the world and say, okay, is this here? What is it? How does it work? We don't assume that this is there or assume that it works in a certain kind of way. Rather, we try to discover that.
Okay. So, how do you balance? You talked about empirical data. So, how do you balance theory and empirical data in research?
Yeah, so there's actually a really strong connection between the two. At least I would argue in good research, in useful research, there's a really strong link. Theory, in a nutshell, simply is a frame that we use. Think of it as almost a mental frame to help us organize the things that we see. Okay. So when we talk about empirical observations, what we're talking about is observable. Right, things that are observable. So something that's empirical is observable. The other side is sometimes we talk about normative statements, right? And something that's normative is something about what should be. Empirical is about what is. And so, the role of theory in this is that theory simply guides the ways that we think about the observations that we bring in. A theory will sort of tell us, for example, what kinds of things are important empirically and what kinds of things we can ignore. Okay, so for example, it's not really a theory, but think about this as an observational question. There are 4 of us sitting in this room right now, right? How would you explain what's going on in this setting? How would you get at explaining to somebody else this observation about what's going on? And you know, so a theory would sort of help us understand that, right? So a theory can guide us along. So for example, is the color of the walls in this room important to understand what's going on? The theory would probably tell, if we're interested in the human interaction, the theory would tell us no, right? Does it matter where we're sitting in the room? Well, maybe, right? Does it matter who has headphones on and who doesn't? Well, maybe that matters too, and maybe it doesn't. But the theory will help point you to the things that you should pay attention to, in a sense that the theory tells you should matter. And then those are the things for which we collect the information. In other words, that we make the empirical observations.
Yeah.
Again, whether we do it through quantitative or qualitative methods, that's the role of theory, is to help guide the things that you actually look at and help you make sense out of those things.
Okay. All right. So, before we go into fieldwork, I would like to also find out, for data analysis, I mean, I also talked about in my Poly 7000, our research method class. So, at some point we were kind of, like worked up about what kind of software to use for our analysis, right? So some said, oh, R is so difficult. Some said Stata is difficult. So there was that, So, but at the end of the day, we eventually used data for our regression, and it was so. I wouldn't say it's easy, but it wasn't as difficult as some other colleagues thought it would be. So I'm asking you, I haven't used R before, but I've used Stata before. Okay. Like, what kind of software have you used, and which one do you think it's more user-friendly for research students?
Oh, great. User-friendly, that is very subjective because what I prefer would be different from yours, right? Yeah, but what I started using SPSS. Okay. And that is back from my master's and my undergraduate level. And coming into the Ph.D. program, we were taught quantitative method by a professor who likes R, right? That is what he's familiar much with. And one of the statements that he made, I remember so much, is that he's not so much interested in the software that you use. What he's interested is, are you able to understand what you want to analyze? Can you use the software to get that response, and then can you interpret it? And so, because basically all the software can do all the analysis you want them to do, either R, Stata, SPSS. It just depends on which one you are more familiar with, and then which one you are more comfortable with. So, I mean, coming to learn R, I think R is, for me, it's just straightforward. All you need to know is, I mean, the coding, and now we have AI. AI can help you with the codes, right? So you don't have to always be thinking about all those structured codes. I think what is much important is, do you know the analysis that you are doing? Can you interpret it? And then, do you know some basic things about the software that you are using? So for me, I like R, but as to whether it's ideal, I think it's very subjective, because all the software can basically do everything. Yeah.
All right, so I would like to take you up on what you said earlier about having to conduct researches. So we are delving into fieldwork now. So I want to ask you, for fieldwork, for your research, how do you prepare? Like, what are the basic steps to preparing for fieldwork?
Well, I think it's just about data collection. So you prepare. One of the interesting things that I've come to realize about fieldwork is that it is very unpredictable, right?
Okay.
You can prepare so well. You think you have a great schedule, you have a great interview guide. You get to the field, and then it's very different, right? So for fieldwork, you want to prepare. In as much as you want to prepare, you want to be flexible as much as possible, because you may be conversing with people, and the conversation will switch to a different thing, which may be beneficial to you. Perhaps you didn't really plan for it, but then you see that it's very beneficial. And so going into fieldwork, you want to be as flexible as much as possible. You also need to know that you are dealing with human beings, which means that you need to have empathy, you need to have patience, you need to have respect, because sometimes you are conversing with people, and they are talking, and you'll be like, this is not why I'm here. I want this answer, but you are talking.
I mean, they are
about
telling you their own problems,
their own sorts of things. Yeah, but it takes patience, it takes empathy to know that, in as much as you are collecting your data, you have a schedule you are working with. You are dealing with human beings. And so going to fieldwork, yes, you need to be flexible as much as possible. You need to know that you are dealing with human beings, and you need to be ready for any changes, because things can happen. I mean, weather changes, travels, and a lot of things are happening. So you have to be as flexible as much as possible.
So I will ask you, are there ethical considerations as regards to data collection? And I want also Dr. Morris to also chip in on this. In the course of collecting data for your research, are there ethical considerations? Like, I've heard about IRB so much, and how difficult it is to get IRB approvals for research, and it looks like a very, very scary thing, because they say you have to, and all that. So I would like Professor Morris to, throw more light on IRB. Then Bennett, like, informed consent, before collecting data, how do you control for your bias, and all that. So, I mean.
Yeah, I think you can start with the IRB.
Yeah, sure. So the IRB stands for Institutional Review Board. And this is a process that grew out of very rightful concern over some real abuses that took place by people conducting research during the 20th century. And one of those events actually took place very near to where we're sitting in Tuskegee, Alabama. It's referred to generally as the Tuskegee syphilis experiments, where African-American males were exposed to syphilis. Some were treated and some were not, as an experiment to find out about treatments. But the research participants were never told they were research participants. They went in seeking medical help, and some got it in effect and some didn't. And a lot of people died, very, very sort of horrible deaths as a result of this. And it was that set of experiments, in addition to some others, that really sort of opened academia's eyes generally, I think, to this issue of research ethics. And so what grew out of this was basically a convention where there would be what is in effect kind of a peer review process to try to identify and then, if necessary, mitigate potential harm to humans. And also, by the way, animals as well. So animal research is also subject to a review process very similarly to this. And so it's a way to make sure that we treat our subjects with respect and with dignity, and that we also do whatever we can to ensure that no harm comes to either
as a result of the research.
As a result of the research, right? And harm can come in a lot of ways. If you think about medical research, for example, certainly medical research could be harmful if there are potential side effects to a medication that you're testing. But if you think also about people who do psychological research, could psychological harm come to somebody? For the sort of research that, say, Bennett and I do, or that we do generally in political science and PA, potentially things like reputational harm could come, right? And so we do things, for example, like try to ensure the confidentiality of our respondents, to say we will not identify you as an individual or in any way that somebody could connect the information we get from you back to you outside of the research group. And so
in other words, trying to keep the person anonymous or something.
Yeah. Now there are exceptions to that, right? There are times when anonymity is not desirable or not needed, right? But by and large, when we do this, we are trying to protect the confidentiality of our respondents and therefore also the confidentiality of their identities, and not connect their words or the whatever form of data we get from them back to them, and so nobody else can come back behind us and identify that. And again, it's a way to make sure that we respect our research subjects. And this is kind of at the heart of that ethics question, right? There are other elements about it as well. And certainly things like data integrity are a part of this, and data security all fall into the same thing, but they're all part of that same basic desire to make sure that we protect our research subjects.
And before Bennett responds, who are these people? Like, how do you get it? How do you get an IRB? Who are the people that actually, who are the people involved in this review board?
So they're generally people within the university. They are typically senior or at least very well experienced faculty members or researchers drawn from different disciplines around the university. And they make up what is basically a committee. We typically call it a board, but it's a board. And they are the ones responsible for reviewing the applications for approval for this research. Now, it's also important to say, because you mentioned earlier that it's a scary process. It can certainly be a frustrating process sometimes. But a lot of the work that we do, certainly in political science and public administration, typically falls under a specific category in this process, and that's referred to as exempt research. And so typically for exempt research, the potential for harm to our subjects is really low. If we're doing a survey and asking somebody about, even about their political attitudes, for example, the potential harm to somebody is really low. Bennett and I spent a good chunk of the summer driving around the state talking with local government officials and others about resilience of their water infrastructure, right? So we were asking them questions about the kinds of things they do and how they can talk about this issue and so forth and so on. Again, very, very low risk. And so for those low-risk projects, there's actually an expedited review process. And so they don't have to go through this whole committee review process. It's handled basically by sort of office workers, administrative people, right, who work in this IRB space. And they typically can sign off on those exempt things if you ensure in your application process that, that the harm is minimal and that you meet certain conditions. And so not every project goes through this entire long drawn-out process.
Okay, all right. I mean, that's comforting now,
Yeah.
Bennett.
Yeah, I just remember, back when I was doing my master's dissertation back in Ghana, I remember when I was collecting my data, around that period, there was this trend where we had one investigative journalist. He came out with some findings about some public officials, and what he does is that he has a hidden camera that he normally uses for his investigations. And so around that period, most public servants were a bit cautious, So when you are going to conduct research, they think that once you enter, the first question they will ask you is that, do you have a hidden camera with you? Yeah. So, and then I have to tell them, no, this is not. I'm not doing any investigative thing. Yeah, this is just pure academic work. And I had to explain to them that this is the work I'm doing. These are the potential harms, and you have the chance to say no. I won't be involved, and that is what ethics is all about. You informing the participant that this is what I'm doing, being transparent as much as possible, letting them know of any harm if there is any, and then letting them know that you can choose to involve or not. And even in the process you can say, well,
you can opt out.
Yeah. So that is all what ethics is about, being transparent about the work, and then knowing that you are dealing with humans, as Professor Morris said, who deserve dignity, who deserve respect. You want to maintain that as much as possible.
Yeah, informed consent is the buzzword that we use to talk about that. So the subject knows what it is that they're doing, what it is that they're in for, and what the risks and the benefits are.
Yeah. And how do you gain access to people you want to collect data from, like the respondents? How do you map them out, and how do you gain access to them?
Well, I think first of all, it's about knowing which people you want to speak with.
Yeah.
And then what we basically do is from my experience so far, just to send out emails. And then also, especially if you are from the third world, emails don't really work. So you have to I remember physically getting letters from my department and then moving to the organizations one after the other, submitting the letters to them, and then being called for the interview. But then here, I think it's quite flexible. You can send emails, and then if you are lucky to receive a response, then you go for it.
And were there surprising or unexpected challenges you've encountered in the course of collecting data?
Of course. One of the things is sometimes you go for my part, especially when I was collecting my data from my dissertation in Ghana, you go to the organization and then the person you are supposed to speak to is not available. And what do? You can't do anything.
Yeah.
And then they will tell you, oh, you know what, come tomorrow, he will be available. You go tomorrow, he's not available. Sometimes, when you begin like that, it becomes so frustrating. But along the line, you get to learn that fieldwork, you have to be as flexible as much as possible. And I also spoke about the fact that you go in there well prepared, you have a schedule that you are working with, you have an interview guide that you want to follow, but then the conversations can switch to a different thing altogether, and you have to you can't tell them that keep quiet, let's get back. You need that skill to be able to carefully bring them back,
manage the process,
manage them, bring them back to what exactly you want them to talk about. So it can be very frustrating, but you need to know that you also have to be as flexible as much as possible. If you have that in mind, I think fieldwork would be.
And have you been in any position whereby fieldwork changed, your perspective, or changed the way you saw the topic you were researching on?
Yeah, one of the things I had to learn in a hard way is that as researchers, we have to be careful about. We have to be careful not to overstate our expertise or our knowledge. Because you go to the field thinking that you have a full grasp of the policy frameworks, the theories, and then when you get to the field, you get to notice that those who have the first-hand experience with those things tend to have deeper knowledge than even you. And so you don't want to go into and which that is one of the things I've really learned about fieldwork, that fieldwork is not just a place where you test your ideas, but then it's also a place where you have to be open to learning, reviewing your thoughts, and then expanding your thoughts too. Because you can't just go in as if you know everything. Yeah, so that's one of the things that I've had to learn from fieldwork.
Yeah, if I can just pop in on something that
Sure.
Bennett said a moment ago too, that I think is important because it ties back to the question of research methods, right, and how you do this, and the question of how you figure out who it is you want to talk to. It depends a lot on the kind of project you're doing, but oftentimes in the work that I do, for example, what I'll do is start by identifying people who I think are involved in the space that I want to be in or that I want to be working in. Those become your first points of contact. But then oftentimes what we do is we use a technique that's called snowball sampling. And basically what that consists of is talking with somebody, and then one of the questions you ask them, typically towards the end of the interview, is, okay, this is great. Who else would you recommend that I talk to that could also help with these same questions? And then you ask those people those same questions, and so forth and so on. And so you build kind of a collection of people who then are engaged reputationally within that space, and then that helps you identify who the key players are. So it's very similar to kind of a network analysis or networked approach to this. Because it is about these sort of human connections, but that's oftentimes how we find the subjects, particularly for field work and for qualitative work, is through something called this idea of snowball sampling.
Oh, okay. Thank you for chipping that in. But we're beginning to wind down the conversation now. And my producer has just informed me that we are really running out of time. But then I want to find out from you that how can you translate your field work into journal publication or conference paper?
Sure. If you think about it this way, the whole point of doing the field work is to try to learn something, right?
Okay.
Learn something new about the world. And so the conference papers and the journal articles are two of the ways in which we translate what we learn about the world into a form that can be passed on to others. Okay. So, for example, the work that Bennett and I were engaged with this summer, became a conference paper that was delivered actually last week at the Alabama Water Resources Conference, where we presented and passed then on to others at the conference what the findings were, and in this case actually preliminary findings of this work. As we complete the work over the next several weeks here, the next step then will be to write a paper starting with the conference paper as our model, but then turning that into an article suitable for a journal that meets journal requirements in terms of length and so forth and so on, structure. And then that will be submitted and be sent through a peer review process for the journal to decide whether or not they want to publish the work or not. So it's through those mechanisms that we then let other people know what it is we've learned about the world. There's another element to this that I want to make really clear, because it's such an important element of what it is that we do as academics, and that is the other way in which we transmit these findings is through the classroom, right? I have a colleague of mine. I've known him. We were together at Mississippi State, so 30 years now. His name is Chris Duncan, and Chris always had a saying about this. Chris's saying was, people who do research teach what they know. People who don't do research teach what other people know. And I really think there's a lot of truth in that, because when you have a professor, an instructor, somebody who has been out and working and learning things about the world, their approach to the classroom is very different than somebody who doesn't do that kind of work. And I think certainly as I was a student, I could recognize that. You folks probably have seen the same thing as well. There's just a very different feel, different approach. But the classroom is then also a place where these findings about the world, this knowledge about the world, then gets transmitted to others. And it gets transmitted in that case through a way to enhance the learning process.
Yeah, to add up to what Dr. Morris said, and apart from, when we want to report our findings, we are not just focusing on researchers, we also have the policymakers there too.
Okay.
So we are also interested in the policymakers and then the researchers as well.
Yes.
And so one way that we also target the policymakers is to also write a white paper where we now are practical as much as possible. And then for the journal papers too, then we try to be, as researchers, we try to act as researchers as much as possible. But we are not just focusing on researchers, we also have the policymakers that we also want them know our findings, and then
inform policy too.
and then inform policy.
Yeah, and Bennett, that's a great point to make too, because I think that's something specific about public administration as a field or as a discipline, is that becomes part of our DNA. It's not just about learning new stuff about the world. It's about actually doing something useful and making the world a better place as a result of the knowledge that we gain.
Yeah.
Not every discipline does that. There are disciplines who sort of seek knowledge for knowledge's sake, and that's fine. That has its purpose. But Bennett's exactly right. The kinds of things that we do in our discipline also should be and are aimed at trying to help make the world a better place, make better policy, help people. Sure.
Okay. All right. So we are winding down now.
Yeah.
So I mean, I would like to take your final words on this topic, but I will cue in a question for you.
Okay.
And then while you respond to that question, you give us your closing statement.
Okay.
Then I will do the same for Dr. Morris. So you studied in Ghana and the Czech Republic,
Yeah.
did you?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And now the US.
Yeah.
So how has this international experience shaped your approach to research methods and fieldwork? And what advice you have for emerging scholars?
Well, how different contexts, right? It's a good question. I think from my experience so far from those three countries, I think research method, when it comes to research, we are still answering, we want to answer a specific question, right? Research method is not different from how it is done in Ghana, it's not different from how it's done in Czech Republic or how it's done here in the US. It's still the same method. We want to be scientific as much as possible.
Yeah.
Just that, different contexts tend to sort of, give you different experiences. Back in,
But does those environments, influence the way you do it?
I think to some extent, you are a Nigerian and you know how our system does work, right? When you want to sort of, especially when it comes to field work, you want to build connections as much as possible.
Yeah.
Because ours is like, we are more socially connected. And so if you want to conduct a research here, sometimes you just go into the organization, just get some few friends, and then they can be able to help you get to the person that you want to speak with. But then, in some parts of the world, it's just a matter of bureaucracy. Follow the right bureaucracy, and then you get the people that you speak to. But still, the concepts do not differ from the concepts you are using doesn't differ in terms of the context, right? So it's the same method we are using, but then sometimes the dynamics do change depending on the context that you are focusing on. I mean, right now we are supposed to, when I came to the US, we had to do a particular study and using an organization in parts of Ghana. And up to now, we haven't been able to collect the data because they said until they see us, they won't.
Until they see you?
Until they see us, yeah. Well, we've been shooting emails. They are like, no, they want to see us. And those are some of the dynamics. And I mean, it's not their fault. It is culture and all those stuff. So sometimes the context tends to influence how you go about it. But the concept as to it being scientific
is the same.
Is the same.
What advice do you have for emerging scholars?
Well, I think you just have to love what you do, right?
Yeah.
Once you love it, however the challenges are, you are able to pull through. So just develop the passion for it and you'll be good.
Okay. So, Dr. Morris, with more than 130 publications, you have clearly mastered the process of turning fieldwork into published research. What advice do you have for emerging scholars who want to publish their first article?
Yeah, sure. So I think probably a couple of different things. First of all, it can certainly seem like a very onerous process. It can seem long. It can seem difficult. You get rejected by the journal when you send it off, and that can be heartbreaking. But perseverance becomes really important, right? If you are careful about what you do, if you're conscientious about what you do, and you follow good practice in terms of the research process, and you keep at it, you will be successful at it. And so perseverance becomes a big part of that. I think the other piece of advice that I would have particularly for emerging scholars, whether you're a student or a brand new assistant professor even, or somebody like that, is seek out people who are experienced at this and try to work with them. I think certainly my experience at a young age was this way, that if you ask, people will help you.
Yeah.
And whether it's just seeking advice, for example, on what kind of technique to do or with a specific problem you're having in research, or whether it's proposing some sort of a joint project, people will be willing to help, and people will be willing to engage. I learned an awful lot from people who were more senior to me. I didn't learn this on my own. And so I think that's a great way for people to get started. And that mentorship, finding a good mentor and learning from that mentor is a great way to get yourself into a great position that you then, as I've tried to be in my own career, you then become a mentor for others and pass that on.
Okay. All right. So I think we're going to draw the curtain on this episode at this point. But a key takeaway for me is what Dr. Morris said. Those who research teach what they know, and those who don't research teach what other people know. So this is a great takeaway for me. I would like to thank our guests on the podcast today for gracing this podcast on this episode, and I want to also thank our viewers. We're only here because you watch us. Thank you, and stay tuned to our next episode.